Hi guys, this is the demo for Intro to iOS where we'll be making our first iOS application. First, let's just open up Simulator here, and this iPhone emulator will run our apps. If this is your first time doing iOS development, then this emulator might take a while to preload, so let's just do that first. Next, let's open up Xcode to set up our project. So we can create a new Xcode project. And under iOS, we want to create a single view application. We can go ahead and name our project. And make sure language here is set to Swift and device to iPhone. It's going to ask us to save our project somewhere, so let's just do that. And then see here that Xcode has pre-generated some files for us. I'll go over and explain what each file is. So under appdelegate.swift, this file basically controls when a user opens or exits your application and allows you to override certain functionality. If you want to like delete some data or clear some memory from that your application created. And as you can see here, this function did finish launching with options is the function we were mentioning earlier in the view controller lifecycle. And this is where your application starts running. And this is also where if you have any crashes, then your code will jump to here and show you an error message. But generally, you will not really touch this file at all, but it's just good to know like what this file is here for. So let's move on to the view controller. So our view controller is a class, and this basically represents the controller that we were talking about in the MVC architecture from earlier. And as you can see, all view controllers you make subclass off of, superclass off of UI view controller. And as you can see here, this view.did_load function appears for this view controller by default, and this is where we generally want to instantiate some data and then use it. But you can also include the other functions too in the view controller lifecycle, such as view.did_appear and all the other functions in the lifecycle that we mentioned earlier. Yeah, but generally we use view.did_load, so we'll just keep it at that for now. Moving on to main storyboard. So storyboard is the view for all iOS applications. This is where you create all your different screens that show up. And right now, since we have created a single view application, then we only have this one view right here. And as you can see, if you hover over here, it says view controller. And this means that our view that we made here is linked to the view controller here, which is also named view controller. So based off of that naming convention, you know that this view is associated with this file here. So as an introduction to all the windows in Xcode from storyboard, down here, this is where we can drag out some like common components we need, like labels and buttons, which are what we're going to use today. And in this sidebar here, which you can minimize through this button, we're mainly going to be looking at this part of the sidebar, which is where you can customize your styles through the storyboard. And For example, if you click on your view here, then you can set its background color to some color, but we'll just keep ours at like the default. In addition, this is where you can minimize or like show the console, and then here you can hide or show the file directory. So for now, let's just get started with making our first iOS application. The idea behind this first application is we're essentially trying to make a bare bones user profile that shows the user's name, age, and points. Additionally, there will be buttons that will let the user increment or decrement their own points. So let's get started by adding the UI to our view. We'll just pull out 3 labels right now. And also buttons. Okay, so as you can see, these components are drag and drop. You can move them wherever you want to, and you can also resize it. So for these labels, we can start off by just setting some placeholder values so we know which data properties we want to show per label. I'll name this name placeholder for the username. This one is the age label, and this will be points placeholder. So we can also rename our buttons, where I'll make this one the increment and that one the decrement button. And just to make the buttons easier to see, I'm just going to increase the font size and also set a background color so it's easier to see where to press. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run this. You can change your simulator device right here. I'm going to change mine to iPhone 7 because as you can see, my emulator right now is running iPhone 7. So I can just go ahead and hit run now. Looks like there's a problem with simulator. Let me try just resetting it. And I'll just also set my background color to white. So I'll just try running that again. Okay, so as you can see, like everything on our view and storyboard shows up in our emulator. As you can see, these buttons do nothing, and all this text is hard-coded right now in storyboard. So since this is, since usually we want our apps to have like dynamic content, then we want a way to be able to change these strings in the code, right? And associate some actions that we can have happen whenever the user presses the button. So the way that we can connect our view elements with our view controller code is through something called an IBOutlet. So to show you how to make that, then let's put our storyboard in a side-by-side with the code through this assistant editor right here. So what we're going to do to create an IBOutlet is first you select the label that you want to connect to your view, and then hit Control and click and just drag it out over into the view controller code. So now you can see that we want to make a outlet connection, and we can name our member variable the name label since it's of type UI label. So this variable here represents a IBOutlet that is called name label, and its type is UI label, which is the label that's shown here. And you know it's connected to this one because if you hover over this circle here, then you see the view highlight over there. We can go ahead and do this for all the labels now. Oops. We can name this the age label. And then we can name this the points label. Okay, so as you can see, all three of these variables represent that specific label in the view. So first, we can just, we want to be able to set the name, age, and points of our labels. So to do that, we should first create a model to represent our data, which our controller will then display onto our view. So to create our model, which is referring to the model in the MVC architecture from earlier, we want to create another class that represents our data type, which is a user. So we're going to go to File, New, File, and create a Cocoa Touch class. Make sure the subclass is of type NSObject, and we're going to name our class user. Okay, so now we have an empty class called user. We can create the member variables of this class, which would be like name, which is a string, age, which is a int, and points, which is also an int. So as you can see here, there's a warning that says class user has no initializers, so we should create a init function for our class. We can first make an init function which takes in a name, which is a string, and an age, which is an integer, and we can by default set points to 0. So here we can set our user's name, which is self.name, to the name in the init function's parameters, and then we can also set age to the age of the user right here. So this class here is our model, and again, it's the M in MVC, which represents our data type that our controller wants to show into the view. So first, let's just create a user object. Here. Okay, so we've made a user object right here, and then to show this data onto our view, then we want to set our name labels text to our user's name, and then we want to set our age labels text to our user's age. But note that since user age is a integer, then Xcode complains and says that we can't assign type int to type string, so we're going to make a string that contains this integer, like this. And then we'll do the same with the points. We'll make a string that will show the value of user points. Okay, so let's try running this now. And as you can see, our application now shows like the data that we have created from the code, like dynamic content. As an overview, like this view controller is actually bridging the model and the view because we're creating or instantiating an instance of the model right here, which is user. And then we are setting the view to the content of the model. And this is all done inside the view controller. So this is an example of how the controller bridges the connection between the model and the view without knowing too much of what's going on inside of the model and the view. Okay, so now moving on, as you can see, these buttons don't do anything right now. So let's go ahead and give these buttons some actions so that they can change the points for this user. We're gonna go back to storyboard and then put our code and view controller side by side again. And as you can see here, the class, the code shown is not of the class I wanted, so I can just click up here to change the file. And I wanted to show my view controller again. So as it's the same with IBOutlets, we can just control, click, and drag again to make a function that represents an IB action. So we want to make a connection that's of type action, and then we will name the function. So in this case, I'll name it increment points. And as you can see here, like event is touch up inside, which means a button press, really. There's other actions you can respond to, like touchdown, editing, dragging, but touch up inside defaults to just like a normal button tap. And then we'll do the same and create an IB action for the decrement points button. And remember to set connection to action. Okay. And if you look at this function declaration right here, it's of type IB action, and it's called increment points, where sender is any. So what this part means is sender is whichever button or view that you pressed, and it says that the type is any type, so any type of view or something. And this part doesn't usually matter too much. So as you can see, it's the same with IBOutlets, where if you hover over these circles, it shows you which button is pressed to trigger this function. Okay, so now what we want to do is increment the points in the user we made up here. But then since this user variable is made in viewDidLoad, it's essentially a local variable to that function. So what we should do instead is just move this outside and make it a property. Make it a property of the class viewController. And we do this because as a property, this user data object can be accessed by all the functions and can be changed accordingly depending on like these functions and stuff. So the first thing to do is we should change these to self.user because user is now a property of the class. And then we can also implement these two functions here. So what we want to do is increment self.user points, and we can do that by saying like plus equals to 1. And then with decrement points, it's pretty much the same thing. Minus equals to 1. Okay, so after changing the user points, we have changed the model, so now we want to reflect the changes onto the view. And we can do that by just resetting the text of our points label. So we can just copy that line into these two functions. So basically, you're just changing your model, and after your model has changed, you're changing the view to show the new value. We can go ahead and run this now. So if we try pressing the buttons, we can see that everything's working fine. So yeah, this is the first iOS application that you guys have made, or have been seen made. As an overview, again, this view controller is the controller in MVC. We made a model called user, which is our data type, and then we showed the data in our user onto the view, which is here in the storyboard. And much of this is done through IBOutlets and IBActions, where if you hover over here, you can see these connections made when you control-click from a certain label into the code. And then IBActions are pretty much the same thing, but they're functions instead of properties of our viewController class. So yeah, that's it for the Intro to iOS demo. And I hope that this makes sense to you guys.